I said I was going to make more Tekken videos, and here I am doing that thing I said I would do. Now, it's common knowledge among the Tekken fanbase that if you are not a member of the Mishima bloodline, you are essentially irrelevant to the Tekken story. This is a pretty big flaw when it comes to the series, because this means like 90% of the roster isn't used in the storyline of your game. And at least for me, I felt that when Tekken 7 ended, and therefore the Mishima saga officially ended, we'd finally start seeing other characters walk into the spotlight. Now, I know the series is never going to completely forget about the Mishimas, but here I am making this list in the hopes that maybe some of these characters might actually get a lot of shine in Tekken 8 and onward. So this is going to be a list of characters that I think are most worthy to have their storylines expanded in the main plot of the game. So just a few caveats to the list. There are a lot of characters in the roster that just have some kind of beef with the Mishimas in general, and for a lot of these characters, they're sort of interchangeable. Their storylines are essentially that their life was going one way, the Mishimas destroyed it, and now they want revenge on the Mishimas. That can describe the story of like a third of the roster. While these characters could have bigger storylines in the main story, since I do have connections to the Mishima and want to take them down, there's just so many of them that if I put them on the list, it would just be choosing my favorites out of that group. Just know that the characters that are like that, this would be characters like Eddie, Shaheen, Katarina, Miguel, Leroy, Lydia, etc., etc. They should be a part of the game story in some way, but probably just kind of a cameo. Like, I kind of think they should be used sort of like how Avengers Endgame use their characters. You have this massive battle going on between Jin and Kazuya, and the people who have beef with these characters will be involved in that war. They'll all get their moment to shine in this sort of cameo, but they're not going to have like full-fledged storylines. Then you can maybe have their arcade mode outside of the main plot, goes into more detail about what it is they were doing during the war. But you just can't give all these characters their own spotlight. It's just an unreasonable request to have. Alright, now caveat number 2. This is not a list of just characters that I like a lot that I want to be a part of the main story of the game. It's about characters in the franchise who have storylines that lend themselves to being a part of the main story, but for whatever reason, they're just not. The main storyline of the series is about the Mishimas, them trying to kill each other, and the chaos that ensues from them attempting to do so. As much as I like characters like King, his storyline of earning money for an orphanage, his rivalry with Armor King, and his friendship with Craig Marduk have absolutely nothing to do with the main plot of the games and the Mishima war that's going on. There's just no reason for him to get involved in the main plot of the game without some very seriously sloppy and uncharacteristic writing. The idea of this list is that the characters on its inclusion into the main story would better that story, actually make a lot of sense, and expand the world as a whole. So don't watch this video and get really mad because your favorite character isn't on the list. A lot of my favorite characters aren't going to be on the list either. Not every character on the roster lends themselves to being a part of the main plot of the game, and I personally don't see anything wrong with that. I wouldn't want to see King's character just ditch the orphanage just so he can be involved in a war that has nothing to do with him. Okay, that's it. All the caveats are done. Let's get started. Brian Fury. Okay, so I'm starting the list with the character that the most people are going to disagree with. I understand that Brian Fury has very little actual character. He's just a force of chaos, destruction, and violence. I get it. By putting him on this list, I am not saying that he should have some kind of deep character arc or massive storyline. That just wouldn't make much sense. But I do think it would make sense for him to be a bigger part of the story just in general. He's literally done nothing for the last 2 games, despite the fact that we know he's currently dying. Dr. Boskonovich may have bought him a little more time by fitting him with that engine, but he's still on a timer. He is slowly dying. So it really doesn't make any sense to just have him be fighting in a war for several games in a row without any worry in the world that he might just keel over at any moment. The only places he could possibly go that are capable of fixing him are the Mishima Zaibatsu and G Corporation. So why he hasn't gone to either of those places to try and save his life is beyond me. In fact, it would kind of make sense for Kazuya to even seek Brian out in order to offer him this in exchange for him fighting on his side of the conflict. Jane is the head of the science division at G-Corp, which is owned by Kazuya. When she was a little girl, her best friend, who was a Jack model, was murdered by Dr. Abel, the guy who designed all the Jack models. This made her devote her life to robotics so that she can bring her friend back from the dead. Dr. Abel is also responsible for putting the cybernetics inside of Brian's body, and Brian murdered Dr. Abel. This means that not only is Jane one of the most likely people to be able to fix Brian's situation due to her studying Dr. Abel's work, but she also owes Brian a debt due to him avenging her childhood friend. This means that Kazuya has the thing that Brian wants. and has the means to get Brian to serve him at least temporarily. Brian is one of the biggest heavy hitters in the entire series. Very few people on the roster are even capable of standing up against him. He's literally been fighting in this war on his own against both sides, and no one's been able to damage him. He essentially makes all earthly soldiers and weapons obsolete the second he hits the ground. He's like the ultimate nuclear option. Just having Brian join one side or the other opens up the story for so many opportunities. Kazuya would then have an extremely powerful soldier working for him that he can't 100% trust because Brian doesn't work well with others, who would just randomly go off on his own and cause all manner of destruction that Kazuya probably wouldn't like very much. And over the course of the series, Brian's pissed off so many people that him joining the conflict would pretty much ensure that you'd have like 4 or 5 other characters join the conflict as well. Everybody from Lee Wulong to Yoshimitsu to Kunamitsu to Dr. Bosconovich to Alyssa Bosconovich all have reasons to absolutely despise Brian. I mean, just think about it for a second. You've got Kazuya dealing with Jin. His hands are going to be full. He can then send Brian to go after the rebellion that's being built by Lars. And then Brian shows up leading his own army of G Corporation soldiers, which will mean that he's going to run into Alyssa. Alyssa sees this guy who nearly killed her father and creator, and then this causes an awesome android versus cyborg fight. Alyssa doesn't stand a chance against Brian, so Brian messes her up, and then Lars has to get involved. Now you got Brian versus Lars and Alyssa, and this is the kind of stuff that we want to see in our story modes for these fighting games. Yes, story by itself is very important, but in a game like this, it's also important to have these awesome matchups between all these legacy characters just going at it on screen. The best part of Tekken 7 is when Heihachi and Kazuya go at it in this epic battle in the center of a volcano. Like, that's the cool shit that we want to see. Having Brian play a bigger role in the war will ensure that we're going to get all sorts of different cool matchups between all these different characters who he's created enemies with over the years. And that's what we're all here for. Let's see some cool matchups. Hwoarang and Ling. So yeah, I'm going to be pairing up quite a few of these picks. These two are paired together for pretty much the same reason. Both characters are very close friends with Jin, and I don't believe that either of them have been focused on the way they should be. You can argue that Hwoarang's actually gotten quite a bit of story in the Tekken series up to this point, but that's really only comparatively to other characters. The man is one of the best friends and main rival to Jin, who is arguably the protagonist of the series. He is essentially the Ken Masters or Kung Lao of the Tekken universe, and he hasn't gotten anywhere near the amount of storyline that those characters have gotten. We haven't seen him fit the role of rival for Jin since all the way back in Tekken 5. He was basically just a cameo in 6 and 7. And even before 5, he has no real storyline of his own. It's always just related to his relationship with Jin. He isn't really his own character, and he should be. On the flip side, Ling is basically the same way, where her entire storyline is always based around her relationship with Jin. But unlike Hwoarang, she's actually not in the main story at all, not even as a cameo. Which is really crazy when you think about it, because these two characters are the closest people that Jin has in his life. They're the people he cares about the most. And their roles in the story are basically non-existent at this point. I mean, I remember back when Ling was originally introduced in the series, I thought she was going to be like the love interest to Jin or something. These three characters were really close back in Tekken 3. As the series has gone on and Jin has become a very different person now than he was back then, I mean, he's a mass murderer now, for one. You'd think that we would have seen Hwoarang and Ling's relationship evolve over the course of that time, but they've actually had very little interaction with him. Ling in particular, despite her storyline being all about her relationship with Jin, I don't think that the two have actually even seen each other for like 3 or 4 games at this point. It just seems like a very wasted opportunity. If Hwoarang and Ling's goal is to bring Jin back to the light side, let us see that happen. And if they can't do that, or if they don't want to do that and they're going after Jin because of how evil he's become, let us see that as well. This is one of the most important parts of Jin's life, and it's completely absent from the main plot of the game. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Asuka and Fang Way. So at first glance, this grouping seems kind of random because these two characters don't have that much to do with one another. Until you remember that Asuka's father was hospitalized by Fang Way back when she was introduced. Like, Fang Way is the reason why she entered the story in the first place. And he's essentially the main antagonist of her storyline that has just never gotten an ending to it. On top of that, both of these characters have pretty big connections to the main storyline of the game that the series just hasn't taken advantage of. Asuka is a Kazuma. She's related to Jin. The fact that we don't know how she's related to Jin is a problem in of itself with the storyline. She should have something to do with him in some way. And on the other side, Fang Wei's entire goal is to become the greatest martial artist who's ever lived. That's his whole purpose for being. And despite that, he's never even attempted to challenge the greatest martial artists in the world, who are the Mishimas. You have a pretty easy in on both sides to get these characters more involved with the main plot. And like I'm going to say a lot in this video, it just isn't being taken advantage of. Me personally, I'm in the mindset that Akuma should not have been in Tekken 7, and instead his role should have been filled by Fang Wei. Mainly because they're the exact same character. character. They're both evil, murderous martial artists that fight other martial artists to the death for the sole purpose of finding the strongest fight possible and becoming the strongest martial artist of all time. That description matches both of them perfectly. But instead of Tekken taking advantage of the characters that they already have that they're not using, they decided to bring in a totally different one who nobody in Tekken cares about from the Street Fighter series, and then use that character to completely destroy the canon of the series with one game. I understand that Fang Way is too young to have known Kazumi, so he couldn't have been sent personally by her to kill her family, but you can easily say that Fang Way's family owed Kazumi's family a debt and this was his way of repaying it. But he doesn't really care about repaying the debt, he's just using it as an excuse so that he could fight the Mishimas. Like, I literally just came up with that on the top of my head on the spot, and it basically makes the story play out the exact same in Tekken 7 but without destroying the canon. From that point, you can then play off Fang Way's entire history of fighting all these different martial artists as him preparing himself to eventually go after the Mishimas. And then just like in Tekken 7, you can have Fang Way fight Heihachi and Kazuya throughout the game, just like Akuma did. And if you're thinking to yourself that Fang Way is not strong enough to go after Heihachi and Kazuya, my answer to that would be, that's up to them. They're writing the story. They can make Fang Way as strong or as weak as they want him to be. If it makes you more comfortable, Fang Way can keep losing the fights and then slowly get better over the course of Tekken 7 until he eventually becomes strong enough to actually match one of them in a fight. Not to mention that Akuma doesn't really have an ending in Tekken 7. Like, he just sort of disappears, and then there's a possibly canon, possibly non-canon fight between him and Kazuya where we don't see the ending of. So there's no conclusion to that arc. If you replaced Akuma with Fang Way, you wouldn't need a conclusion to that arc because you can have Asuka come in to attack Fang Way, and that can be the conclusion. You can then end the game with Asuka versus Fang Way and then Heihachi versus Kazuya. That would have meant so much to the Tekken fanbase of people who really like Fang Way and Asuka and want them to be more involved in the story. Sadly, they didn't do that, and they decided to screw up the entire canon by putting Akuma in there. So hopefully in the future we could see Asuka and Fang Way play more of a role. Sergey Dragonov. I cannot fathom why Dragonov is not more important in this franchise. He is an enemy of the Ravens, the UN, and the Mishima Zaibatsu, and is a top soldier in the Russian army who has a vital role in the current war that's going on. He has a connection to every major faction in the game and is either allied or enemies of every major character in the game. But for whatever reason, he's not really being used all that much, and I don't get it. Tekken has a lot of really interesting character concepts and characters with unbelievable potential to be able to do all kinds of amazing stuff within the story that is just not used. Characters like Dragonov, Feng Wei, and Brian Fury have enough potential in their initial concept that they can be main antagonists of whole other series, but they're held back simply due to lack of usage. And more so with Dragonov than either of the other two, I would find it difficult to not use him in the main story because of how vital he is, or how vital he seemingly is. Now luckily with the introduction of Vincent in Tekken 8, it seems like they're going to use the Ravens and the UN as a more important force in the storyline, so hopefully Dragonov will also get a bigger role in this upcoming game because he is seriously underutilized. I mean, just look at this guy. Everything from his design to his demeanor to his personality is just begging to be used and expanded upon in this franchise. Claudio and Zafina. So these two characters basically have the exact same goal. It's to take down the Devil Gene. But unlike other characters in the franchise who are going after them because they want revenge, Claudio is a leader of a group of exorcists whose sole purpose is to destroy evil and banish demons. Kazuya and Jin have the Devil Gene. They are literal demons. Claudio could essentially be used as their kryptonite. He literally has exorcist powers that are specifically used against demons. And Zafina has the power of Azazel, who is the being that created the Devil Gene to begin with. So what you have here is two characters who both have goals to destroy the Devil Gene and both have powers and abilities that can be the weakness of the Devil Gene. And the storyline of the games essentially makes it so they're barely a factor, when in reality they should be the biggest threat to Jin and Kazuya that exists. Much like Dragonov, I actually think that Claudio will have a bigger role in the next game. We know by the end of 7 that Claudio is actually teamed up with Ling and they're going after Jin. And this can create a lot of really cool story opportunities. Like, what if Ling believes that Jin can be saved and Claudio just wants to kill the demon because he's an exorcist? That can create interesting tension between Ling and Claudio, where Ling then has to decide should she side with her friend Jin or with Claudio, who's this good guy and trying to save the world from the devil inside Jin. You can even have Claudio and Zafina come to blows. And with Claudio having the authority over an army of exorcists, he could be more than just a threat to Jin and Kazuya, but an actual force within this massive war that's going on. While Zafina still has the threat of Azazel growing inside of her hand that she can't actually stop. And we're not really sure if Claudio can stop it either. So that will also become a factor in the future, hopefully. There's just a lot of really cool potential with these two characters, and not only their relationships with Jin and Kazuya, but also Ling and some of the other factions that are in the game. Paul Phoenix. This is the one that makes me the most sad. Because not just me, but I'm pretty sure any Tekken fan who is watching this video now knows that this probably is never going to happen. Paul was at one point the main rival to Kazuya and one of the strongest fighters in the entire series, when the series took him seriously. But hasn't done that since Tekken 3, and it's probably not going to. The fact that in Tekken 8, Paul does not have a special intro when it comes to Kazuya is more evidence that the series has kind of just forgotten the fact that these two actually had a pretty close relationship at one point. When I say close, I don't mean good. I just mean like they knew each other pretty well. Me, like everybody else, hopes that Paul would get his shit together and be a bigger force in the Tekken universe, but quite honestly, I just don't see that happening at this point. He's been turned into a joke character, and he will likely continue to be a joke character. I'm just hoping that with everything going on in this war and this massive earth-shattering shit that's happening that's caused by Kazuya, his old rival, this will snap him out of it and make him realize that he actually has to get involved. And although I doubt he'll ever re-up his rivalry with Kazuya, maybe there can be something there. Like I said, this is the one I think is least likely to happen, despite the fact that I want it quite a lot, and I believe the majority of the fan base would also like it. Honestly, I'm just tired of seeing one of the best fighters and characters in the entire franchise faceplant for the last, 4 or 5 games. And that's it. That's my list. My apologies if it ended like a wet fart. I probably should have put Paul earlier in the list and ended with a better choice. But hey, it is what it is. So by all means, if there's any characters that you believe would improve the story, please comment down below who they would be and how they can affect the story in a positive way. I'd love to hear y'all's opinions on this, because I know I'm not the only one who's tired of seeing all the best characters sit in the background. Anyway, like I said before, I'm going to continue making Tekken videos until Tekken comes out, and probably make a couple of videos after Tekken comes out. So if you like stuff like this, please like and subscribe. And y'all be safe out there, you hear?